My name is Nitika Gupta. I am a program manager lead in the Microsoft Identity team. My team is responsible for all our IT admin capabilities for identity security. So that spans across conditional access, which is our zero trust access engine, our strong authentication story, which allows you to verify the identity, as well as our identity posture capabilities as well. I'm joined by Mark Morosky.
Yeah, I'm Mark Morsinski. I'm a PM on our customer experience team. So we work with customers on their deployments of Azure AD.
Mark is a good friend of mine, and also he brings a wealth of customer experience. So I'm looking forward to him joining us and sharing all the color from his experience deploying these scenarios with customers. Cool. So we've been talking about digital transformation for a while. The global pandemic has accelerated it. We firsthand saw customers deploy identity security capabilities in days, which would take them years, sometimes months. And we are also seeing complex, multifaceted nation-state attacks which are pushing the boundaries of the level of protections that we and our customers need to think about. Just recently, in May 2021, Joe Biden also announced an executive order to improve the cybersecurity state, where he called out the need for federal agencies to move to a zero trust architecture. So I won't spend too much time here. I think everyone has heard of zero trust, and they're starting to see zero trust being adopted across the board, including by our executive order. So when we talk about zero trust, what does it really mean? It sounds like a buzzword. What does it look like in practice? We at Microsoft define zero trust as a proactive, integrated approach to security that spans across all your layers. And it's about explicitly and continuously verifying every transaction in your environment, making sure you are asserting least privilege. And lastly, you're relying on all the intelligence and advanced detections and having real-time protection in place within your environment. We at Microsoft have defined three core principles of zero trust. The first one, as you heard in the definition, is about verifying explicitly. This is about never trust, always verify, always make decisions based on all the available data points, including the identity of the user, where are they coming from, their location, the health of the device that they're accessing from, the kind of application or resource they're trying to access, how critical is the data within that resource, and the anomalies that we are seeing with regard to the behavior. Second, we want to use least privilege access. And this is about limiting access with just in time and just enough principles that we are familiar with. Lastly, assume breach and minimize the blast radius with microsegmentation, end-to-end encryption, continuously monitoring your environment, and making sure you have automation in place to respond to those threats in real time. Digging into the architecture, the foundation of zero trust security is identities. And zero trust not just applies to your human identities, but also your non-human identities. So it's about your employees, it's about your collaboration scenarios with your partners and vendors. It's also about your workload identities that are accessing services in your environment. Next is endpoint. And this is about explicitly verifying the device that the user is coming from, what is the health of that device, and feeding that into the access decisions. Now, identities can be coming from any endpoint, and they'll be going through a network, could be a private network, could be a public network, to access all sorts of data, all sorts of application, whether it be SaaS, Microsoft, non-Microsoft, on-premises, line of business applications, as well as infrastructure, which could be Azure or it could be Google Cloud. It is a multi-cloud environment. In terms of the unification, in the center, you have the zero trust policy engine, which looks at all the data points available at the time of access. So it looks at identity, it looks at endpoint, it looks at what kind of network the user is coming from, it looks at which app the user is trying to access. It also looks at what is the classification of the data. Is the user trying to access high business impacting data, as well as what kind of infrastructure the user is trying to access. And then it can make decisions about whether to allow access or block access, or allow limited access, or require additional verification before we allow access. So the Zero Trust Policy Engine looks at all the data points, makes access decisions, and we have policies across each of these layers as well for you to enforce Zero Trust. Further, you want to enhance your policies continuously. You want to monitor how the policies are in terms of protecting your environment. Are there gaps in your policy coverage? Because those gaps will be discovered and exploited. What is the end user experience? Because what we are hearing from customers, and you'll see it in a slide, is that Zero Trust is about enabling the business, right? So what is the user experience? Are they getting over-prompted for MFA? What's off in your configuration that is leading to that poor end user experience? So you want to continuously monitor your environment, monitor the policies, monitor the experience and all the telemetry, and continuously improve the policies in your environment. Lastly, I talked about assume breach in a previous slide. You want to constantly monitor all the insights and signals in your environment. And that's where the threat protection comes in play, where you can feed all the signals from all these pillars and then see them in a single pane of glass and have automation to respond to the signals in real time. And these signals indeed feed into the Zero Trust Policy Engine, so you can make real-time access decisions. If the sign-in is risky, let's get the user to do multi-factor authentication. If the user account is compromised, let's make them change password right away. So there are three main components when we think about Zero Trust that are cross-cutting, that are integrated, which is about the policy, which is about optimizing your environment and policies, and lastly, it's about threat protection. Now, you might wonder, how can Microsoft help me with all these scenarios? So this is a slide that shows you a comprehensive portfolio of what Microsoft has to offer in each of these areas. So I won't touch on each of them, but as you can see, we have products in each of these areas.
So my question is, one of the key things of Zero Trust is that you analyze everything for every single transaction, so you can do rapid containment. How is this achieved in this model?
So as I was talking about earlier, you have the threat protection layer, which is looking at signals from all the pillars, if you will, identity, endpoint, data, apps, infrastructure, and that feeds into the policy engine as well. So a concrete example would be, if you look at Azure AD conditional access, we can look at the user risk and the sign-in risk and make decisions based on that. On the endpoint side, we have the device risk. So we can make decisions about the risk of the device and choose to block access or allow access.
But can I actively block? So I detect a threat, and within a split second, I can block everything to prevent something like NotPetya a couple of years ago. Because I don't have minutes of time available, because then my data center is gone.
Exactly. That's the point about feeding the threat detection into the Zero Trust Policy Engine, which can act in real time. So the moment we detect that this is a suspicious login or this is a suspicious user, we can block it right away. And we also have this capability called continuous access evaluation, which is about sending signals to the application. So the moment something goes wrong, the application will come back to the policy engine to reevaluate the state of the policy and immediately enforce the policy. So our customers have a heterogeneous environment. I'm sure if we show the slide to our customers, there'll be several products here that they have in their environment. So that's where we have a broad set of partner integrations across Zero Trust to meet our customers where they are. And this slide demonstrates those integrations across each of these pillars and how they help with each of the scenarios. Moving on to the fun part, right? So we at Microsoft have the privilege where we get to work with thousands of organizations across the globe and help these organizations on their Zero Trust journey. And here are some lessons that we have learned over the last 2 years. We published them as part of our Zero Trust position paper about a few months ago. So you can find the link to the paper at the bottom. It's at AKMS/ZT model. The key learnings we got from customers: first, zero trust is about enabling the business. It's about enabling the business to work from anywhere, whenever they want, and how they want. So you have to continuously monitor your environment for user experience and tune your policies and plans so you are aligning with the business. Second, you have to think about zero trust holistically. It's not just about protecting your employees. You have to think about protecting your business partners as well. You have to think about your workload identities, and that applies to pretty much every pillar, where you have to think about, are you thinking about security holistically for every aspect in your environment? That said, you want to think big, but you also want to start small. So specifically for Azure AD, we know several customers have their applications on premises, and they are working to integrate their applications with Azure AD, but this will be a journey. So think big, but start small. Keep making progress, moving one app at a time, having a conditional access support for the app rather than waiting for migrating all that apps and deploying the security policies. Third, have an integrated approach for security and break the silos. Historically, folks were focused in their own verticals. So identity team is focused on identity, endpoint is focused on endpoint. But what we're seeing is that it's all integrated. And for you to defend against the latest and greatest attack, you need to think about this in an integrated way. So this means in terms of product that you want to break the silos and think about what's the integrated approach to security. This also means in terms of people and process within your organization. You want to work with other teams within your organization to deploy security features. Next, good hygiene and governance is critical. So when there is a crisis, you're best equipped to respond to it. A common example we think of is apps, and sometimes we need to get in touch with who created that app or who manages that app. And we often find ourselves in a place where we don't know the app owner, and this is about not having good hygiene. So it's really important that you're continuously monitoring your posture, ensuring there's good hygiene and governance in your organization. So when there is a crisis, you are in a place where you can respond to it in a more structured way. Lastly, there's always shortage of resources, especially in the security space. So the more you automate, the better it is. So automate any manual task that you're doing, automate responses to the threats. Like our question earlier, you don't have the luxury of hours and days to respond to these threats. You have to respond to this in real time. And the way to achieve that is automation.
Yeah, I mean, I have stories for like all of these from the different like Fortune 500 customers that I work with, but I actually was kind of curious more for the audience, like, you've been working in your environments and with your customers, is this aligned to what you also see? And if anyone has like any comments or challenges, I'd like to hear that, or like a thumbs up or thumbs down on the video. Like does this meet kind of what everyone else is seeing with their environments that they work with?
Well, I would say maybe. This is all pretty high level, and I kind of need to see those examples to see if they apply.
Sure.
How
So
let's actually work in practice.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the first one. So, when everybody had a Snap working from home 2 years ago, there was several customers I worked with that had already been kind of embracing the zero trust mindset and been kind of like, doesn't really matter where you work, and they were able to adapt to that pretty quickly. And then there was other customers that had to do 4 years worth of IT in 3 days, and they just like did it. And sometimes they were overly aggressive in what they did. So they would say, you have to MFA for everything all the time. And now we started to get to where people have MFA fatigue, as well as like people would complain, like, all I do, I can't work because I have to have my phone next to me because I have to keep, hitting MFA approve all the time. And from a security perspective, like, we're trying to verify exclusively that this is who they say they are. So instead of just constantly prompting people for MFA, what we did was then start moving those to a passwordless type of authentication, like a hello for business. So they would do that strong authentication on sign-on once. We were then able to then do their productivity work, and we wouldn't continue to keep prompting them, right? So that's one of the good ones. A second one was that, people used to get their devices, and like the device would show up to the company, depot, it would go on the workbench, they would do the imaging and stuff like that. And like that doesn't work now. People have been onboarded where they didn't even go to the office. So this is kind of moving towards the, Intune Autopilot type of thing where, they get the machine, they unbox it, they authenticate with their credentials, and then like the image just comes down. They don't have to be on the corporate network plugged in to get that type of configuration pushed to their device. So that's a good one. So I'm not sure, does that kind of align to what you're seeing? Is there other one specific pillar or specific statements here that you're more interested in digging into?
Really cool sounding stuff, but trying to switch from that on-premises environment to using Autopilot, because as you said, people went remote. Their laptops are remote, and trying to switch to Autopilot from an on-premises solution is tough.
Yeah,
I'd love to do it because you look at GPOs. That's how a lot of companies manage the laptops, and if you never connect a VPN, GPO does not work well.
No, it doesn't, and especially what we were doing when we started kind of playing around with Intune was doing a lot more app deployments, right? Instead of having to physically remote into the machine, install the app, push it, we would just go through Intune and just push it there. So it was nice to be able to kind of dive into that and get my feet wet and get a better understanding of and how these solutions work.
That's a perfect example. And I think there was some of the customers I work with were more mature in this, and they were kind of already testing this. And when they had a flip, they just had stuff they had to do and they moved it. Other customers, they were still in the GPO model, like you said, and they really it was a good time for them after they kind of put out the immediate fires and the VPN, they stopped the VPN from tipping over and that kind of stuff, to reevaluate. We've been setting these GPOs since maybe sometimes Windows XP, and we just kind of carried those forward. Did we really need to set these settings? Should we think about a different way of managing the device? So I think a lot of people were kind of taking that approach when they started moving from a pure domain join, GPO gets pushed down to more Azure AD joined, and then the policies come down from an MDM provider.
I think from our perspective, all these things here, we want to integrate. We want to increase the security, and I think everything is pretty much welcome. The main challenge that I see is the implementation of all of those. So starting, if we are inside the Microsoft universe, even there you have to fight with different configurations, different monitoring mechanism, different log formats. So the main challenge is to get all of those together, and keep them running. And we had this very busy screen with partner integrations. It's already challenging to integrate all these Microsoft products with each other. It's even more challenging if you have a couple of partner integrations as well running, So that is what I have done in the past year. These integrations is hard to get right,
That's consistent feedback that we get, and at least from a product side, that's an area we are investing in. How do we provide you more integrated tools, guided experiences for deployment, tell you exactly where you are in your deployment journey across those products, not just in silos of products. So from a product side, we take that feedback, and that's something that we are actively working on.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've heard that feedback, and I always joke with my customers, there are many one Microsofts at Microsoft, because you can really tell, this is a different team that built this, and this log format doesn't align with this other log format. It's you guys are one company. Do you talk to each other? And it's probably not as much as we should. So we've heard that feedback, and I think that's some stuff that we're always working to address. But you're totally correct. You're totally correct.
Is there, for basically building off of that, is there any kind of, a lot of organizations that I've worked with or supported to consulting is they don't really know their exact workflows, or sometimes they don't quite know how things are functioning. Is there any support within this that you can kind of turn on to monitor what's normal, or understanding your workflows in that sort of automation? Not, I can automate this because I know exactly what's expected. It's tell me what's expected in my daily working so that I can then figure out the automation side. Is there anything within it that has that feature?
Is your question though about the workflows, or detecting where all my stuff is? I think those are kind of two different things.
It's kind of a mix. It's if you want to implement zero trust properly, you need to know what's normal, what needs to happen, where are people signing in, what devices they work, those are all normal expectations. But what if you don't know what the actual processes are? You don't know what needs to be, does that make sense? In a very large organization.
How do you start? I want to do how do I start, right?
In a small organization, it's easier because, you tend to know who's there, what they're doing. But in a very large organization, it's not nearly as easy.
The way we've been tackling that problem, we've been investing in deployment guidance. So we have a zero trust assessment tool. I have a link to that later in this deck, where you can go answer a few questions to understand where you are in your journey and get a few recommendations from us. The second is, as part of the zero trust white paper that I mentioned earlier, we do have a maturity model which defines the different stages of maturity, what that looks like, and then it breaks it down by each of the pillars as well. What do you want to do for identity to go from maturity first stage to significant progress? What do you want to do for endpoint? So we do have that guidance in place. The other place for guidance from a product perspective is the M365 Secure Score, which evaluates identity, endpoint, and several of the pillars that we talked about earlier, and tells you what are the gaps in your environment. Do you have multi-factor for all your users? Do you have multi-factor for your admins? Have you disabled legacy auth? So that's another good place to start, and welcome your feedback on what else can we do to help our customers in this area.
Yeah, so on that point, I think that, this is great to see, right? I think that, at least speaking for myself, this is aligned with, the motherhood and apple pie of the zero trust that at least some of us have been talking about for 5 or 10 years now, and that everyone was kind of thrust into in the last 2 years. I think the last or the next stage to your question is, the more practical stuff. I think at a high level, this is great. And I think for folks who are new to zero trust, which is still a lot of people, for better or worse, this is a really good kind of primer. But I'd love to see kind of that next level of the practical advice of how do I actually implement this architecture? How do I use this maturity model? And even if it's within the Microsoft ecosystem, I think that would be a huge benefit because a lot of people are in that ecosystem.
The big challenge there, as others have sort of alluded to, is regardless of the size of the organization, it's a very slow-moving ship to make some of these changes.
Yeah.
You talked about MFA fatigue. There's already examples in the wild of people rolling over at 2 a.m. to an MFA prompt that they didn't,
Right.
begin, and hitting yes and then getting breached because somebody's, attacking them that way.
That's right.
We move on from that to passwordless authentication, and people are used to a username and password, and to try and suggest that we're now going to go passwordless, and they get very confused, and it hurts workflows a lot. Look, as an example, legacy authentication was messaged. How long has Microsoft and organizations tried to get rid of legacy authentication in Office 365? It's been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back because orgs can't turn it off because of legacy applications that still need to use it. So a lot of these changes are great in theory, but practically implementing them becomes very, very difficult with every organization, I think.
Absolutely. And I think we have deployment guides for each of these pillars, and we'll share the links, and we would welcome feedback because I personally think adoption should be our big focus. And I think our customers are getting hurt, like they're getting compromised because of lack of adoption of these features and technology and how far we've made it as a vendor. So just specifically taking an example of legacy authentication, we released several tools, I think last year, for how you can understand your legacy authentication usage and how you can target blocking conditional access policies more granularly to block legacy authentication. And we continue to invest in tools to give you visibility and insights on how you can approach your deployment. And this is a journey, so we have a lot more to do.
A lot of companies have purchased like E3 licensing. A lot of these features, like when you talk about conditional access and getting the increased features of conditional access, you need an E5. Telling a company that has 5 to 10,000 licenses of E3, just buy an E5 to get those features. It's a huge uptick. And then when I see, and not to disparage Microsoft, I see a lot of times with like products like MFA, which works, but not in the on-premises world, even though you have an E5 license, it's kind of lacking features. Do you have any comments about that? Is Microsoft doing more to make things better?
Yeah, I think I would say that conditional access is part of E3 and Azure AD Premium P1. The only thing that you don't get is the risk signals, the sign-in risk and user risk, which is E5 and P2. I think on the second one, we do have a MFA server solution. We do have integration with ADFS, NPS to allow customers to secure the on-premises environment as well. That said, there might be gaps that we need to go fill. So welcome the specifics of what is missing, and we'll take that feedback to heart.
Yeah, I mean, I probably shouldn't say missing. A lot of times with Microsoft, things like MFA, it will work if you add all these other things on to get it working in the on-premises world, where I feel like there are competitors out there, and we just talked about MFA competitors out there that look at those gaps and build their products to work already for them.
So the only thing you should need for the on-prem is the Radius MFA adapter, right? So the NPS adapter for Radius. I think what a lot of customers did is they go, okay, we should do the zero trust stuff, but I don't know where to start. And like, this is a lot to take on. So a lot of them started with either the collaboration apps, which most people used. And so they start with like, Office 365 or Google Apps or whatever one that they're going to use there. And then they started to align with based on risk to their environment. So if you don't have a business continuity plan, like that's a really good place to start for like your most critical assets and start working your way through those and trying to either modernize or start to adopt those zero trust principles against those. And you kind of work your way down, because otherwise it's too hard to like, we're going to zero trust all of the things. And it's like, what does that even mean? And where do I even start? The second question was about like, this is good high level stuff, but like, where are the bits and what should I configure? We have some stuff here in terms of, it's like a zero trust recommendation configuration. It used to be called the golden config. I could remember, I'm not sure what the link is now, but it basically says, for Exchange and Office 365 and these different types of applications, these are the conditional access knobs you should go turn if you're at like, everyone should turn this knob, or if you're like at a more highly sensitive environment, you should turn this additional knob. And if you like are extremely like sensitive, you should turn this other knob. So we kind of give you those things to go do for Office 365 applications for an Azure AD perspective and as well as an Intune perspective. And then the last thing was about like, how do we, I can't remember the last specifically the question, but I knew what I was going to talk about, which is like, how do you get people to move faster on some of this stuff, especially the business? We have these older applications, and one of my customers that's been the most successful at this is they moved all of their applications that were modern authentication, and they moved those to Azure AD, and they have all their conditional access policies and all that type of stuff. And they restrict access to those resources, either coming from basically a corporate device, or you have to do strong authentication, like all that kind of stuff that they can do based on like the risk profile of the application. And now they have like all these on-prem apps that have been there since like 1991 that do LDAP and do NTLM V1 and Kerberos and things like that. And the business says, well, are we at risk from this? Like they present this as a business risk, that this is what we have in the environment. And then this is the work that would be required to reduce that risk and move it to a modern authentication protocol. And they let the business dictate, do they accept that risk? Like, we're okay with this. Like, we're okay if this happens to this application, or we can't secure this application. What is the risk to the business? Or they say, no, this is unacceptable. And that forces those business units to then dedicate their resources, either people or whatever they need to buy a new version of the application or whatever they're going to do to then start to move that to a modernization approach. And this customer has about 500 apps that fit into that category, and they think they're going to be able to be done with LDAP at the end of this calendar year. They're going to move all the LDAP apps out and get rid of their LDAP environment. But you got to present it in a way, as Nika said, this is a business thing. Like, this isn't like we're going to secure it for fun. Like, this is the risk to the business, and this is what we gain from doing this, and this is what we need to go do that.
We've talked about the conditional access policies, and I think earlier Ryan made a comment about users' privacy, identity, and endpoints being part of the same challenge and the solution as well. Are you guys now or going to be taking like your XDR data and feeding that in for some of these policy decisions, like just for identity and authorization of here's the pattern of this user and this profile of a device, and suddenly that shifted? Is that something we're doing now?
Within conditional access, we have user risk, which is about how likely is this user compromised? Does the user have leaked credentials where we detected these credentials out there in the dark web? Or have we seen anomalous activity which makes us think this user is compromised? So CA can enforce policies based on the user risk. You can block, you can secure password change. We also have integration with sign-in risk when at the time of access, we can detect if the user is coming from a Tor browser or suspicious IP addresses or different patterns, and we can require MFA or require fresh MFA there. We also have integration with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, where you can enforce device compliance, and Endpoint Manager looks at the device risk, the endpoint risk as well, with Defender for Endpoint. And if the risk is high, you can move the device out of compliance and you can revoke access as well. I also touched on continuous access evaluation earlier, where the moment the user state changes or the environment state changes, we are able to send a signal to the application to come back to us to evaluate the policy. So that way we can enforce these policies in real time rather than waiting for the session to expire. So those are some capabilities that we already have in the product.
Okay, so it sounds like you're doing posturing with endpoint, but not necessarily using that for behavioral pattern analysis for identity decisions yet.
We have that through Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which can look at posture as well as risk on that device.
So I wonder if the examples you've given so far have been pretty good in getting me on track with where you're going here. But could I ask you to do this? I'm an IT manager at a very small company with a whole suite of Microsoft companies, products and third parties, and I'm going to go through this process. What does that look like for me, and what am I going to do? I'm at a mid-sized company, and I'm the IT director with a couple dozen locations, a factory, and sales. What does this process look like for me when I go in here and I start answering these questions and going to deploy these things? And I work for your Fortune 1000 type companies, and I'm in IT hell trying to get anything done. What is going through this process?
Yeah.
Like for me?
So I think for the smallest of the small, depending on how the size you think, I think security defaults right now would probably be a good place to start for that, which kind of knocks out like a lot of the recommended conditional access policies, requires everybody to do MFA, turns off legacy authentication, things of that nature. But in terms of kind of like where should you go, this is where we have that ramp model, which kind of talks about that. And usually most people kind of start with we kind of say like start with the strong authentication of the identity. So that's kind of like your MFA aspect of it. Then you're going to start to get to all your conditional access policies and making sure you have that aligned to what you have from your risk profile in terms of like you want to let people come from unmanaged devices or not, which sometimes people do, sometimes people don't. And then you're going to start to layer on then you start once you have your policies kind of set to what you want, then you start adding more and more apps into those policies, and you start to take those applications that are doing modern authentication, like SAML, OpenID Connect, or OAuth, right? Those can plug in Azure AD pretty easily. So you start moving those. Then you start layering on as part of this, like making sure your logs are going to your SIEM solution, all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of like the first big 3 buckets I would start with. Does that help, or do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm talking about specific roles. I'm at a really small company, 1 or 2 locations, the small devices. What are the things I'm going to do? I'm in a mid-sized company with multiple locations. What additional things am I going to do, and who else needs to be called? I'm at a very large company that has to deal with policies, procedures, and regulations from hell. What does it look like for me when I go through this process? I'm talking about very, very specific sizes of companies that have very different risk and technology profiles. How I haven't seen your documents that you're talking about here. How does it walk me through that process in those 3 different scenarios: small, medium, and large?
I don't think the ramp model, the ramp stuff is geared per size of customer. Because you can be medium sized and be extremely complex as well, right? As like a large one. But I think it's still going to be the same type of things where you need all your users need to do a strong authentication method, right? Like you got to do MFA today. So regardless of the size, you got to do that. Now, if you roll it out via security defaults, could you turn on and all your 50 people get it like the same day? Or if you're going to schedule the rollout and things like that, or even like a very large Fortune like 1000, right? Like that might take them 6 months to get that done, right? Because you got to go get buy-in from the senior leadership team that we have to go do this. You have to like prepare people. You got to get the documentation, all that kind of stuff. So that I think what you're going to end up accomplishing is going to be the same. Like you got to MFA these users. Then you're going to start to do those conditional access policies, and based on like what you want to protect and your risk, as well as then I think from the devices, that's an easy one too, especially the smaller you are. Like that's where you want to do Azure AD join. You have your Intune, push those down. Those Fortune 1000s, that's where all those GPOs from hell come from and all that kind of stuff that you're going to have to go unwind that. So in terms of like teams, right, you're going to need the identity team that's going to do this, like, and they're going to set that kind of stuff. You're going to need the devices folks that are going to do this. You're going to need apps, and like the people that own the apps in their environment, because you're going to have to start moving to a modern authentication stack from that. You're going to need the general security risk people that are going to agree that this is the new risks that are going to enter our environment by doing this. We accept this risk. This is how we mitigate this risk, all that type of stuff. You're probably going to need maybe some compliance as well. Like, I mean, all that type of stuff, but you don't really have that when you're a very, very small shop, right? So I think it really, I know you're not asking about all three. The ramp model kind of gives you this path. I think depending on the size and complexity in your environment, like we can get into like really deep on that. My experience is mostly, to be honest with you, is with the Fortune like 50, 500 type of customer where it's, 75,000 plus. The largest customer I work with is over 1 million employees.
So just reading between the lines, from your perspective, the Microsoft Zero Trust model is applicable from the largest to the smallest company. It's just a matter of the integration, what I read from your response. Yeah. So more or less your technology stack should work for everybody, and you don't have a, let's say, phased model that is built from very small to scale up to very large. Yeah.
I would say so. I mean, I have some of those larger companies actually. They have like a new startup that's like a spinoff, right? Like a new group that they're going to kind of like incubate and spin off, and they start those groups all cloud, no on-prem. And one of the architects said, "I'm so jealous because they don't have all this like technical debt boulders that I got to go deal with in terms of all these things. Like they can just they just go, and like they don't have these on-prem apps and all that stuff. So yeah, I think it's actually sometimes easier if you're that size because you don't have all this legacy stuff that you got to deal with. Like you don't have a mainframe, right? Like they're like, what are we going to do with this mainframe app? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I don't know what you're going to do about that. But like someone's got to think, like if you're new, you don't have that. You just everything's.
Yeah, this is exactly what I experience as well. If you have a lot of old baggage, it's hard to integrate. Especially some of the tools are quite, let's say, labor intense to get them integrated. Yeah. And if you are completely starting on a green field, then it's easy.
Good to go.
You're good to go. Yeah.
I'm curious about. I've seen the what if in conditional access, but what else is Microsoft doing to help? Because when you have a company that's been around a while, they may have other things on premises that can't just switch over to Azure AD and do a SAML authentication. Like I know there's what if in the conditional access, which is okay. Is there anything else Microsoft's doing to help find the stuff out there that needs upgrading right away?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you can answer anything coming from like a product side that you want to talk about, but I can tell you what people kind of do with this. Because when you kind of think about it, it goes into like three buckets. It's like the users, the devices, and the apps. Like that's kind of like the main thing, right? And the user stuff, like they got that going. So you're really talking about like apps is kind of what we're getting at. The first question is like, do you have an app inventory? Some people do. I know it's unbelievable, but some people actually do. They have an app inventory, they have an app owner, they know all that kind of stuff, and like they have that. But a lot of people don't, even though it's like one of the core like CIS control number 2 that you should have an app inventory. So once you kind of get your app view, things kind of fall into like a couple buckets. The first bucket is this like, do I still need this app? Because like this app's been around forever. Maybe 3 people use it. No one knew about it, but you found it. So like, do I still need this app, or can I just get rid of it? The second question then becomes, okay, I can't get rid of it. Can I purchase a SaaS app equivalent of this application that's like, because this is core to my business. So like the example that people have used before is like, you have your own internal timekeeping system that was made in like 1995. Can you just buy Kronos and then you don't have to do any of this stuff? Because like they have all the modern stuff and like you have your modern web app and all that stuff. You don't have to deal with this anymore. If the answer to that is then no, I still need to do it, then the question becomes, can I modernize that application? And that's beyond like first part is modern auth. Like you need to do support probably at a minimum SAML, but probably you want to do OpenID Connect if you're going to start today, right? And then you want to think about some of these types of applications, like they're probably a traditional client server thing. So do you want to modernize it in terms of like stateless and it can fail regions, like all that kind of stuff? And then if the answer to that is still no, so it's some sort of critical app, we've lost our source code for it, but we still really need to, like, how do we modernize it? That's where you're probably going to throw that in some sort of like VDI type of solution where you maybe put some sort of like reverse proxy in front of it to get to where you need to get to, and then you can apply those policies at that reverse proxy level.
Yeah, so I was almost thinking, like you said before, you're a small company, you just turn on security defaults.
Yeah.
But that may not be a good idea if you do that over a weekend and Monday comes in and oh crap, the accounting system isn't working anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we have anything that's like, I mean, this is like a old question, like, someone telling my digital estate stuff, right? Like you want like spider your network to tell you like this app, it might be called like app test 01, right? But it's actually like that's the production.
Almost like the what if in the there's what if, but there's a way to do other stuff.
Right. So actually, this is the reason why we have report only mode in conditional access. So in addition to what if, you can actually create a policy in report only mode, and that will just sit and collect data. And then you can go to the insights and reporting workbook and filter down to that policy and see what is the impact of that policy within your environment. These are the users, these are the apps, these are the devices that will be impacted. And then you can make a decision whether you're ready to enforce that policy or not. Do you want to give end users a notification because of the broad impact or not? So we do have report only mode, which allows you to understand the impact of the policy before you deploy it. After you deploy it, you have the what if mode. We also have conditional access dashboard now that we announced at Ignite last year, where you can see overall how protected you are. These are the users that are protected by conditional access. These are the apps. These are the devices. These are the gaps in your coverage. This amount of traffic has conditional access. This amount doesn't. So you can actually see what are the gaps in your policy coverage. We are also investing in insights and reporting for MFA as well for end user experience, understanding how often the user is prompted for MFA. So that's another insights dashboard that we released a few weeks ago. So there are several tools within conditional access, report only mode, the insights and reporting dashboard. On the MFA side, we have MFA prompts dashboard, authentication method insights as well to help you understand what are the gaps in your deployment and what the user impact will be.
Seems like we've been kind of talking about small company, medium, mid-size, and enterprise, but I feel like that's converging a little bit more now because we have all of these small businesses that are having to meet, for example, DFARS and CMMC requirements, and keeping up with that along with the changing defaults in the platform and not really having a centralized workflows and dashboards for these things. You guys have any maybe advice for those smaller entities that don't, they have the same controls requirements, they don't have the same personnel and resources to execute against that? Any advice there?
Yeah, I don't really have anything specific. Like I said, most of my stuff's with the larger ones. But so like, how do you like make sure you're compliant, but you don't have the personnel to make sure you're compliant, right? It's kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah, I think from a product side, when we think about the smaller businesses, we want to provide you the tools which make it easy to deploy the guidance to protect your environment. So security defaults is an example where it's a package of policies. You just deploy security defaults and you get good coverage for identity security. The other thing is within conditional access, we invested in templates where you can pick from the recommended policies from Microsoft. So I would say for a small and medium business, I would recommend use the tools, recommended tools to deploy features rather than customizing things as much as possible to minimize the future.
Isn't like M365 Security and Compliance Manager have some of that built in too, where like there's like a dashboard that kind of shows you how you're doing on that stuff, I believe. It's a little outside our area, so I remember seeing it, but I don't know the specific details.
Yeah, I don't remember offhand, but we do have like several guided experiences in M365 to make it easy for small and medium businesses to deploy security, including we have a wizard for multi-factor authentication as well. So I would say if you're a smaller medium business, just stick to the recommendation as much as possible. Use the tools that make it easy, customize less so you have less to troubleshoot, and unique policies.
And Fast Track is a resource that I think everybody has access to, right? Nitika, where they could, for those they can call Microsoft, and they have like a whole we have a whole group called Fast Track that helps with those types of deployments for the small and medium businesses.
Yep.
That's what I was thinking, who would I ask? I was like, I'll think of the Fast Track people that I talked to see what they run into.
So none of the tools then will keep up with the changes and customizations that companies might have to do. Seems to me that if you don't have things like the compliance engine and the secure score that keep up with it, you're never going to get a lot of customers past step one of your maturity model, because they're going to be too afraid to make changes. They're not going to be able to keep track of, et cetera.
Absolutely. And that's why we continue to update the secure score with new controls. So that's actually another great tool for small and medium businesses. Instead of figuring out your deployment, go to the secure score to understand what are the policies that Microsoft recommends you deploy.